I want to introduce you to our wonderful guest here. Alon wrote this incredible book. It's the only verified book on the account of October 7th that is out. Like, everything has been verified. And so my question to you is, what were you doing before October 7th?
Big question. So thank you for coming. Really, with the traffic in Georgia, I didn't know.
I did say traffic, and then I got stuck in it too. And so did you guys.
But anyway, when I was younger, I came here to the United States. I was around 15, and I came here to a camp in Maine, where a camp that is basically dedicated to bring teenagers from conflict zones to basically live together and play together, and also, you know, have a 2 hours discussion every day about the conflict, which gives you, a lot of experiences, especially in such a young age. When I came back to Israel, I decided to write a book about my experiences from camp, my personal experiences, how it was for me. So that was my first book, which I published at the age of 16. And and then I came back to camp as a facilitator 2 years later. In the meantime, I also took part in many different leadership organizations in Israel and abroad. I was also a TV anchor. I had a weekly TV show in on 3 different Israeli channels, where I basically interviewed people on weekly matters, whatever happens the same week. And then I got drafted to the military, like everyone else. And during the military, I was a spokesperson to the foreign media in the unit called Coordination of Government Activities in the Territories. To make a long story short, it's a unit that is dedicated to handle civilian affairs in the Palestinian territories, which means that the unit was coordinating life-saving medical treatments for Gaza patients to enter Israel. During COVID, where the unit was coordinating vaccine deliveries and test kits to the Gaza Strip and Judah and Samaria, and had a vaccination campaign for Palestinians. And also during military operation, when we had Guardian of the Walls in 2021, and other military operations in the past. So Israel, the unit specifically, but the IDF and Israel generally, was making sure, whether it's Israel itself or facilitated, or just facilitated from other countries, basically to make sure that humanitarian equipment gets into the Gaza Strip. When Israel was coordinating by the time, 2021, for instance, humanitarian assistance, trucks carrying humanitarian aid to the Gaza Strip via the Kerem Shalom crossing, which is basically the commercial crossing. It was in 2021, during May 2021, during the operation. So Hamas was launching rockets specifically at the trucks carrying humanitarian equipment in order to prevent the trucks from getting to the residents' hands. And I was a spokesperson to the foreign media. I was in touch with hundreds of journalists on a daily basis from all news outlets, which obviously wasn't easy. You're familiar better than I do from how those media outlets look like. And then, hey, thank you for coming. And then when I finished the military, I started studying. I started studying political science at the University of Haifa, close to my home. I basically live in northern Israel. And so then October 7th erupted. And this is my history until October 7th. But from October 7th forward, everything has changed. My personal life as well has completely changed. For many various reasons. I'll probably elaborate more, but yeah, that's what I did before.
You went from doing all of that. October 7th hit. How did you decide to get these testimonies? How did you get these testimonies to permit you to write this book? Because obviously, I would think that a lot of these people who have experienced what they experienced may not want to talk about that. Is that true or no?
So on October 7th, already I realized that I was sleeping not in the same rooms, but also on the same beds where my friends were slaughtered on October 7th, meaning that some of my military service I also served next to the border in the Gaza Strip. And Hamas terrorists basically who invaded Israel on October 7th, they actually, and this is really, it still is hard for me to comprehend that 3 people were murdered in the same bed that I was sleeping in just, a year and a half before. It's just a matter of timing. And I'm also a neighbor and a schoolmate of Matan, who is still held hostage in Gaza. And I'm also the grandson of a Holocaust survivor. And right on October 7th, I already kind of foresaw the worldwide denial that we would face around the international community. Such denial that we're facing right now, only a year after. So just imagine what is going to happen in 50 and 100 years from now. Just like we are dealing with the Holocaust, but in my opinion worse, because although it is more documented than the Holocaust, we are living in a fake news world with AI and so many people who are we're trying to deny even what they see in front of them. So I just felt the duty to start collecting it, and I wanted to create that documentation that would be completely uncensored, completely unfiltered, unsanitized, a document that would share the most elaborated, specified details of the atrocities that occurred on October 7th, understanding that if we don't have those details, then it will just be forgotten and denied. There is no other way. It's not just enough to say that there were bodies on the ground and people died. And so you're asking about getting people to talk. That was very difficult. It was right after October 7th. We're talking about rescue forces, medical teams, Nova survivors, people that were logistically even very busy after October 7th. Still, the bodies were still being counted. But that was only the first step. The most difficult part was during the interviews with them. Because during the interviews, when I spoke with them, I had to go basically to get into their soul, to ask them very insensitive questions sometimes. And I also describe that interaction that I had with them in the book. Insensitive questions, because when someone speaks to you, he doesn't tell you exactly what happened on the ground. He tells you that that was terrible, there were atrocities, people died. But if you want to get to the specific incidents in some specific locations, want to know exactly what happened, you have to ask the very difficult questions. And so that was perhaps even more difficult than the logistic stuff of getting them. Trying to convince them to talk, about the worst that they saw, and not to just random people, sometimes to their family members, to their friends, close people who they just lost like 3 weeks ago maybe. And now I'm encouraging them to talk about not only why they died, about the specific of how they saw them die in front of them. And that was emotionally very difficult. Obviously, the entire emotional process of collecting the testimonies was difficult for me as well, because I witnessed everything. We're talking about Nova survivors who survived festivals, who I interviewed, about the recovery forces, Zaka, were on the ground and recovered the bodies. And also the Israel's Medical Forensic Institute, where the bodies that were initially not identified after October 7th were brought to be examined and determine who the person is. Sometimes it took months to understand.
Right.
Yeah.
So you said you have testimonies from Nova survivors. Did you do that deliberately, like making sure you get testimonies from different areas, like the kibbutz, or you mentioned the medical professionals or the police? Like, was that your goal, is to get like a well-rounded?
I wanted to make sure that I cover as many aspects of October 7th as possible, meaning the kibbutzim, the moshavim, the migunit, the festival, the deadly roads, from children to elderly to foreign employees, to sexual abuse of women and men as well. Rarely we talk about sexual abuse that occur to men as well, and for the first time in the book, it is there. and children and entire families and even animals, the little things that we don't even think about October 7th because it was so terrible, but so many, animals and cats
Right.
and dogs that were just shot for no reason, just
Right.
on the streets. So I was trying to cover as many aspects as possible. And I believe I did, only you asked yourself when to stop. You collect the testimonies. I was writing the book simultaneously. And I was thinking like there can be 1,000 more testimonies. When do I stop? And I did only when I felt that I covered most of the aspects of October 7th. In order to get to that point, obviously, you have to find the specific people that would give you specific information from specific incidents and places because you want to cover as many locations as possible. And that's not easy, especially making them to talk. One of just yesterday, and it was, yeah.
Excuse me. Excuse me. סליחה. Por favor.
פשוט המשרד שלי.
בסדר, אתה יכול לקחת את
זה מפריע.
לנהל את השיחה במקום אחר.
I don't know what's happening.
תלך.
He took one of your books last night.
Oh, that was nice. It's delightful that this is the spot he chooses to talk. Anyway, I'm
Anyway,
sorry.
yeah, let's focus. That's what matters. Anyway, so,
You were talking about when to stop.
yeah.
Yeah.
And in order to get to that point where you stop collecting the testimonies and understanding that you covered most of it, you do have to speak with many people. And also, usually most of the testimonies that you explore with people are the so-called, and it's so hard to say, but just for the understanding, the usual testimonies that we know. People saw other people who got shot, people saw bodies, and we can't just repeat it, we can't just repeat it, also not only in the book, but also with the information we have to get to the more specifics. And in order to do that again, and I wanted to say gladly elaborate, I'll have to elaborate more about also the testimonies, some of the testimonies that are in the book, but in order to get to that, it was very challenging. And also during the process, making sure that I take the testimonies that I explore, making sure that I write them in the book, describe them as I receive them, as they are, not trying to filter them or censor them or soften the atrocities that occurred. I do not have the legitimacy or the privilege to try and soften what happened, and I don't think we should apologize for what happened. And this is also something that I'm frequently criticized. Obviously, I get, on the other hand, I also get like many good reactions from families of hostages and mothers whose sons were murdered on October 7th, appreciating the work I did in order to commemorate the last moments. And on the other hand, I can tell you that there is criticism. First, why would the Jewish people need a book that would commemorate the wars that happened to them for generations to come? And the second thing would be, is it not insensitive towards the families and the victims themselves? And obviously, I always welcome any kind of criticism, and if you want to share and talk about it, I would love to do so. I don't accept it because I think that the very core of that initiative, the purpose is to help the families, to make sure that the world doesn't forget what happened to their loved ones, to make sure that this is a national and a mission, to make sure that October 7th is not forgotten or denied. We are among a very, Israeli or Jewish or supportive community, probably most of us, because we are here today. But we have to understand there are so many people who don't only deny the atrocities, but the vast majority which supports it, and another great majority of people, basically they don't know what happened on October 7th. They really don't. Even if it's not from a bad intentions, they don't know what happened on October 7th. And we have to make sure we commemorate the atrocities so people know what happened on October 7th. It's not only about commemoration, by the way, it's also the very basic legitimacy of Israel to fight for not its right to defend its people, the duty to defend its people, And And it's part of the legitimacy to our sovereignty. You always just imagine what would happen if we didn't have a country. We don't need to imagine. Just see what happens when we did have a country, see what happened before we had a country. We don't need to imagine. So, yeah, that's part of it.
Alon, can I ask
No worries.
how many people you've interviewed and how many had got into the book?
So in the book there are approximately 20 people that cover approximately 50 to 60 testimonies, because there can be one volunteer that shares some testimonies, or there can be some people who share the same testimony, but obviously there were way more. And that relates to the question of the verification process, because in order for the book to be out, I knew it wasn't like just a personal initiative of mine, a personal project. I knew that it has national consequences. And I need to make sure that every testimony is completely verified. And so it was a long process of speaking with women organizations which were assigned to investigate war crimes from October 7th, sexual abuse. Speaking with some volunteers to see that the testimony is shared with some of them, seeing the bodies and specific atrocities that are out about in the book in my own eyes.
You actually saw the bodies?
I did.
Or the
I also saw the bodies, yeah.
in Shura?
Huh?
You went to Shura? To the base?
Not sure, but there is also Abu Kabir, and there are other places. But obviously also, we also have the photos, and we have, even those were not shared with the public that I saw myself. And I was in touch with Israel's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which was part of the facilitation of, in order for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to take this book and distribute it all over the world, which I wanted to, they said, well, you've got probably a great initiative here, but for us to be able to distribute it, we need to make sure it's all been verified. And it took months for them to go over the testimonies over and over again, sending me to speak with different groups all around to see that we can, and there are some testimonies that I was certain 95% that are correct, but I didn't put them in the book because I just couldn't. So I had to speak with many people, with many different groups, in order to come up with those 50 testimonies, approximately 50 to 60 testimonies. Yeah.
So when you mentioned groups and verification, did you come across anybody like at the UN?
So I was in
UN
touch
women?
with UN organizations, also external ones, not only in Israel. Yeah, definitely. But usually those organizations have less access to information than inside, meaning Israeli women groups, judges, former CEOs of women organizations that are very dedicated to the truth, and we had to have consistent either Zoom or physical frontal meetings with them to go on each testimony specifically, and not only on the testimony itself. Sometimes you're completely certain that the testimony happened, you have a body in front of you that can be clear, but when you describe the specific incident, how it happened, you want to also be very precise. So it's also very challenging, and you have to take the time, and it might be very frustrating as well, because the purpose has been from the very beginning getting it out as soon as possible. We need the world to know, and we do. And just in retrospect, I realized how important it was, to take the time. I was, enthusiastic. I wanted the book to be out. I wanted people to see it. And luckily, I managed to hold myself, take the time, verify the testimonies, work very hard on it, and I'm super confident with what's in the book right now. Yeah.
So unfortunately, we were planning on getting a shipment of books in, and you would have been able to buy them tonight, but what?
A what?
Shipment.
Okay, sorry.
By the way, this is Moran, who is kind enough to open her home to us, so applause for you. But unfortunately, they didn't arrive. So my question to you is, how does someone actually buy your book? Is it on Amazon right now, or?
So let's talk about Amazon.
Uh-oh.
So it is available on Amazon right now. The thing is that when we were trying to upload it to Amazon, it was initially blacklisted and citing violation of guidelines. Violation of their guidelines.
Why?
And then we asked, why?
That's a good
Yes.
question.
Which violation, which guideline had been violated? Let's maybe adjust it if you think it's been violated. We never got an answer. Time after time after time, endless efforts, we never got an answer. And only then, after press coverage, and after trying, me going to the press, talking about it, going against Amazon, suddenly one day, they said there had been a mistake. There had been a mistake. That's the only thing they said. Up until now, we can't know for sure. We can just speculate like we all do, but we can't know for sure what the reason was.
Is that a mistake?
This is what they said.
Okay.
This is what they said. I'm saying we can just speculate what happened. I believe that we are all in the same, we all have the same thoughts why it did. But we still can't know for sure. I'll tell you more than that. There is the Spanish book that has just been finished its translation, and that we uploaded to Amazon exactly 8 days ago, and it has not yet been approved, although it's approved within 72 hours. Let's see what happens. So it is now available on Amazon, luckily, and perhaps my little revenge is that small revenge of Amazon and people who are trying, to prevent from those testimonies and atrocities to be exposed and that people would see them, is that, for instance, in the UK, in the category of violence against women, it reached #1 bestseller very quickly. And that's very important because it's not only Jewish communities, it's not only people who know, but so many others who don't. And obviously I get many comments from all around. I was invited to speak in the British Parliament next month. I'm going.
Mazel tov.
Thank you for that.
That's awesome.
And really, the purpose is to share the testimonies with you. I'll share some, because I think as hard as it is, sitting here today, especially so close to the anniversary, we have the obligation to take a moment and reflect on what happened to us on October 7th and what happened to our brothers and sisters. So I do want to apologize in advance if it is graphic and hard to listen. But unfortunately, this is what happened to us on October 7th, and we have the duty to make sure we remember it.
I personally think it's nothing short of an incredible effort that you've made to educate people and to bring awareness. It had to have come to a lot of personal pain for yourself experiencing that. So apologizing to us for what you've experienced. I'm grateful that you're sharing personally.
So
Hopefully everybody else is. That's why we're here, right? And I think, the whole goal of doing programs like this is so we can all go out and educate other people. It's not just like we're talking and then we all leave. So hopefully everybody will learn something. And if you have any questions and we can't get to it tonight, don't hesitate to reach out to me. Because the goal is, again, we're creating a ripple effect that eventually become a giant wave and take over of awareness. Because unfortunately, there's a lot of ignorance out there. I know everyone has seen it, I'm sure. It's impossible not to see it now. So please continue.
I think that the thing is that you're saying about everything that I've been through, it's so related, to the testimonies of, every time I share different testimonies. It's very, I come here and I know what I want to say, but I also speak from really the bottom of my heart, especially when we're talking about the date surrounding October 7th, people may think that because I've seen so much and I've heard so much, it becomes easier. It doesn't become easier. My pain is just like yours. I'm not immune because I've seen more. And at the very beginning of the process of collecting the testimonies, I had a very hard time to see my newly born niece, who was born on October 8th, today. She's
Wow.
now she's 1 year old, and I had a very difficult time coming to my family and visiting it in order to see it, and they were offended because they didn't know why. And one of the reasons is that when I was interviewing Zaka volunteers, I was exposed to one of the testimonies in which the recovery forces entered one of the kibbutzim, where they found a little child in a ruined house. They had to go over the ruins because it was completely destroyed, and that child was completely burnt. And also the ceiling basically fell on him, was basically collapsing on him. But when they moved to the next room, if you can call it a room, what was left of the room, they found another child who was also burned. It's very hard to determine what his age was at the time because of the condition of the body. I saw it, I can tell you. And this child was not only burnt, but also had a knife stuck in his skull, inside the head. And not only that, but next to the body itself, next to the little body, was a hammer. On the hammer itself were still pieces of the child's skull. And then you see the bodies, and it's very hard to determine how old the boy was, and it's very hard to... But this is one of the testimonies that I was exposed to and I share in the book, and it's just an example of why it was very difficult for me to look basically at my family members while I was talking to them. Another testimony, for instance, was again, I used to share testimonies about children and kids because I think they're the hardest for me, but also the most touching ones, and also represent the cruelty of October 7th, where in that specific case, the recovery forces found a very unusual body, in a very unusual condition, with no gunshots. Usually all the people have gunshots on the body. Bless you. And in this specific case, this was also a child. There were no gunshots on the body. But this child was not only beheaded, but also his hands were cut off. And we can't tell what happened first, whether his hands were cut off or first he was beheaded. But since there were no gunshots on the body, we know that he was being tortured while he was still alive. This is what we can tell. So this is the extent of the cruelty of Hamas and other terrorists on October 7th. They didn't come to Israel only to kill and to murder. They came to exterminate every small piece left of humanity in order to make sure that the families of the victims wouldn't even have a grave to grieve on. They wouldn't even know who the person that died is. And so it is very related to the second part where I spoke with the Medical Forensic Institute, where bodies that were not identified were brought to, and sometimes it took 2 or 3 months to identify them. And in that part, not only the visuals were very difficult for me, but also the fact that I was able to connect a body that I see to a specific person. Once it is identified and I know who she or he is, now I know their faces, now I know their families, I know what happened to them. And that was this was even harder than the visuals, because now I know who that 12-year-old beheaded girl that I'm seeing, I know who she is. I know where she is from, I know her name, I know her family, I know her photos from when she was alive. And then you also find more testimonies of the cruelty of Hamas. People, and another testimony, proof that Hamas didn't come to Israel only to kill, but again, just to exterminate and murder and frighten and terrorize a person who we were unable to identify. Basically, Israel was unable to identify who he was because he was murdered in 4 different methods of death. Not only was shot, Not only he was burnt, not only he was stabbed, but he was also run over by a car. 4 methods of killing. This is how hard it was to identify the person's body. And the third part was speaking to Nova survivors. And there you speak with survivors who are on the ground, perhaps losing some of their friends or their family members, having to make super difficult decisions on the ground. We have to remember that Nova survivors didn't make it because they were lucky, but they paved the route to survival, each one in his own way. They're so brave and so courageous to have made those decisions, because if someone had stayed in the same place, they wouldn't have made it. This is the situation, and they were brave enough to make difficult decisions, including whether to keep running for your life or staying and jeopardizing your life in order to save your friends who just fell during the run or who just got shot. Whether to help people you see either getting raped, or people who you see getting shot or injured, or and you just go because, and just imagine, and obviously we all know we can't judge anyone with those decisions, but just imagine the guilt that they must be feeling. And then I come back to the moment where you're sharing that story with me, and I have to face them and unfortunately ask them, so do you feel guilty for what happened to your friend? Do you feel guilty for not having done that? Do you feel guilty for not having done this? Because this is crucial to understand those testimonies from them, as hard as it is. One of the testimonies from Nova is when that's a really short testimony in the book, but it's about a young woman that basically informed her parents that she was at Nova during the massacre, and she was trying to save herself. And obviously the parents weren't satisfied of just waiting at home and waiting for news. So the father went down there to save her. And she made it, she survived, but he was murdered. So sometimes, there are crazy stories that we can't even comprehend. And having shared all those, some small piece of dozens of other testimonies that are described in the book, I think it's crucial, as hard as it is, I think it's crucial that we know exactly what happened, because not only that it will be harder to make, let's put it like that, if I tried to collect those testimonies today, it would be way harder. People have already, the survivors and the rescue forces have already started, the therapy processes, etc. Maybe they don't want to talk about it anymore. Maybe they forget. Maybe they don't know exactly what happened. PTSD, maybe everything. And yesterday I got a very moving message. Yesterday on October 7th from one of the volunteers, Zaka volunteers who I interviewed, and he said a voice message on WhatsApp, and he said, "Thank you for forcing me to talk, for insisting when I didn't want. Every time when you called 10 times, I never responded, and you kept pressuring me to speak, to have another meeting, to talk about what we didn't have the chance to talk about, what I refused to talk about. Thank you, because I'm not sure I can share it with you now, because I'm not sure, because that's so important." And that was very moving for me to receive it from him. So that's, just about some of the testimonies in the book, some about my emotional process that I've been through during the last year, and if that has been so very emotional and hard for me, just imagine how it is for them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So you talked about people, getting therapy and talking to people to work through what they've experienced. You're experiencing it by taking the testimony. Do you have people to talk to? Or how are you doing?
Great question. So I truly think that it's a very intimate group, so I also feel very comfortable sharing it. The long-term consequences are yet to be seen. That's why I think I'm very busy now with distributing the book, after having written it. Since the book was out, I've been going on world tours from one place to another, speaking with journalists and diplomats and world leaders. And just yesterday, we were able to. There was a memorial event also in Canberra, Australia, and the embassy basically distributed books to everyone, to the guests. And one of the guests was a senator who just today stood in front of the Congress in Australia and just read one of the testimonies in the book. So this is how important it is. Just imagine. So I'm saying I'm very busy these days. So I'm not focused really on processing and analyzing everything that I've seen and been through. But obviously the images are still in my mind.
Of course.
And you can't unsee, you can't unhear. It stays with you forever. And again, it's not only visuals, but the connection you make. Sometimes, you have so many names. If any of you was at the event yesterday, but in any event, you see the names that were murdered on October 7th, names that no one can remember all of them. That's unbelievable. But suddenly there is a name, and I see in my head, I see the face, I see the body, I see, and I know, and yeah, that's not easy. And yet, just like I said yesterday, by the way, which is very important for me to say, I really do not regret. I do feel, on the contrary, I feel the privilege to have been given the opportunity to be the one to commemorate the atrocities, to be the one to take such an important mission upon myself, because I believe I've put aside everything that I've done since October 7th. I have put aside my studies. I'm supposed to start my third year in the university. I don't even have an idea when it starts. I didn't even inform them. Put my social life aside. I put everything aside. I believe in the mission from the bottom of my heart. And so there is a greater cause here, and it's not even not only the state of Israel, but victims and their families and the heroes who we owe it to. And then I'm again, can't say glad, but I'm satisfied that I've done that and I managed to do it. And always when I had my difficulties and I wanted to stop and I didn't want to hear more, I always reminded myself that this is not about me, this is about, I can't, it's hard to express how huge this is.
Right.
I'm holding it, it's hard every night when I hold it, it's hard for me to even express and acknowledge and comprehend how huge it is, not only now a year after, but also for centuries forward. Yeah.
Is it in Hebrew as well?
It is in Hebrew, it is in English,
Coming out in Spanish?
coming up in Spanish and Chinese, Chinese as well.
But you wrote it in Hebrew?
I did. And we're managing to get 500 copies to Chinese officials from the government as well in Chinese. That's why we did it. That's why we translated it. Yeah.
When you were interviewing the victims, was there any afterwards processing for them? Because it would be very emotional.
Yeah. So each one, up until now, from the survivors and those who gave me the forces, the recovery, each one, takes it in a different way. There are some people who tell me, after what I've seen and been through and the people that I've lost, there is nothing to live for anymore. It does exist, I won't lie. On the other hand, there are people telling me, after this, I'll maximize every second of my life. So it goes both ways, to be honest. There are some people who just can't move on, who are still, locking themselves up in the house. And there are people who are moving forward. I guess it's very subjective. It depends also on the help you get. It depends on the experience you've been through and also on your emotional threats, not as judgment. It's different from each person, right? It changes. So it's very subjective.
As you were talking, I keep coming up with questions, so I'm
Sure.
writing them down. It was very difficult. How did you know when it was like you went too far? Like you had to stop asking the questions?
Well, and I also sometimes describe it in the book, when they just screamed at me, or it was, I saw that it was too much for them. For instance, I'll give you an example. One of the Nova survivors was speaking about the fact that he was hiding in a tunnel. Here is another testimony, stuck between two bodies, such a small ditch at Nova, stuck between two dead bodies, and he had to keep squeezing between them just so he wouldn't be seen by the terrorists. And he was there for a long time, and he already felt it's been hours since the attack began. It was approximately 6 or 7 hours without him having water. He didn't have water. And he felt at the time he's sharing that he felt that he was about to die because he was running for miles, so many miles and he didn't drink for a second. So he was already feeling that he was going to die inside the ditch. While he was talking and sharing with me their testimonies, he started choking, having a very hard time to breathe, needing water. Specifically, I share it in the book as well, I say it. And I'm asking him, let's get water. See, you need water. In that specific case, he refused. He wanted to continue, for instance. But in such situation, this is just an example of situation where there is no choice but to stop. Sometimes just in retrospect, I say, maybe I went too far. But most of the times, it's me regretting that I went too far rather than regretting that I didn't go too far. Because I did try to push them to the edge, to tell me exactly what they saw, because I felt like otherwise there is no choice. I could have spoken with some people for almost an hour, and I'm telling them, I understand they have been sharing, they were sharing their experiences and feelings and with me for an hour, and I'm saying that's very important, and I'll share it in the book, but it's not enough for the world to remember. And I know, according to what you're telling me, that you saw more and that you're not sharing. And we have to know. You are, and I'm not exaggerating, this is what I'm telling them. I'm telling them I'm not exaggerating. You're from the only people in the world that can tell us what happened on October 7th. The Holocaust, we had way more people that could tell us what happened. Here, so many were murdered, and a small group who's not only been through it, but also is willing to already sit and talk. And once there is that conversation, I wanted to maximize it, even if it means being insensitive sometimes. And I also share my feelings about it in the book. And this is one of the talks that I'm doing, but I'm doing other talks as well. And sometimes I speak to hostages that came back or families of victims. And as hard as it is, I say the same thing every time, even if they're sitting next to me, that sometimes there is no choice, as I feel, and you may think differently, it's completely fine, to prioritize documentation and commemoration over being sensitive. And there is a different approach, also putting the witness in the center. But I believe that this is way more than any of us. This is national, and not even in national. In international, you said we're welcoming every group here. I write in that you don't have to be a Jew, you don't have to be a Christian. It doesn't matter where you are from the world. I always say more than that. You can even be a pro-Palestinian and still support the importance of documentation of the atrocities that were committed on October 7th. This is about being a human being. That's as simple as that. You have to be a rational human being to support the commemoration of October 7th.
We had a question over here.
Yeah, I don't know if everyone can hear me or not, but first of all, thank you for writing the book. I know it was very hard to do, and it's a hard read, but it's important.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank
And
you
I got
for
mine
that.
on Amazon, so.
Yeah, I saw it.
And I hope you'll sign it later. But
Sure.
what I wanted to get your opinion on is I've been fortunate to have gone to Israel a couple of times in the past year and spent some time in the Gaza envelope and been able to visit some of the kibbutzim and some of the other sites too, the Nova site and the Car Museum and all that. But the kibbutzim and seeing what happened there is very emotional, it's very meaningful, very eye-opening. of, as I know you know. And I know a lot of the kibbutz members want to move back, they want to rebuild, and move on with their lives, and I totally understand that. And they certainly don't want tour buses coming through their neighborhoods. But on the other hand, you talked about the world needs to see, the world needs to know, to read.
I know where you're going.
To read your book and all of that. What are your thoughts about keeping, you know, some of the destroyed homes and stories and everything?
So I wish we could do both, you know, keeping it and letting them go back, but it's not an ideal world, we can't do it. One of the people that I interviewed in the book, he said, and I'm just quoting, it was right after October 7th, so at the time, you know, he said, if we rebuild the kibbutzim, we'll be the worst, biggest Holocaust deniers. We'll become I'm quoting him, we'll become the worst Holocaust deniers. So I'm not saying that, you know, no, I'm not saying that radically, because I definitely understand the need of people to go back. But at the end, trying not to go around and just say it, it's yes or no, right? It's either rebuilding it and letting people go back, or leaving it as is. It's not really in the middle. There is no place like, can you replicate it to some, maybe,
No,
but it's
they
not
will
the same.
leave some of them. They've said many times that they will leave some of it.
So yeah, so what I'm thinking is that the decision that needs to be made is to leave it as is, as open museums for people to come for centuries. As hard as it is, I know how much I can be criticized for it, and I understand where it comes from. If someone criticizes me for it, I say, you're probably right. You are probably right. But that's just my personal perspective, because also we know, we have to remember it's been only a year. We're not going to stay here, 50, 100, and 200 years. We don't think about it. But the survivors won't be here, just like the Holocaust, and what's going to be left is the specific, just like you go to Auschwitz today, just like you go to Birkenau and Majdanek and all those places. Isn't it super important that those places still exist?
Exactly, and just to let everyone know, if you haven't bared witness, we did a live virtual tour of Reim, so you could always see that on YouTube with one of the heroes that helped saved so many people in that kibbutz. So many people, and I know I don't have to tell you this, but it's overwhelming. I mean, it really is. Go ahead, Harry.
You finished?
I'm finished. Go ahead.
I want to go back to before October 7th. And with your knowledge of testimonials, and for those of us who've been following Israeli intelligence for years, we now know since October 7th that the Mossad and IDF can pinprick any terrorist anywhere they want in the world at any time. I think there was a massive intelligence failure before October 7th. There were plus 3,000 plus terrorists that broke across the border. Where was the communication lag? Where was the intelligence of listening into their conversations and figuring out that they were planning this? It didn't just happen overnight. It happened for months before the planning.
That's for sure.
So I just wondered if you had testimonials of IDF soldiers or Mossad or people like that.
So I'll do it both ways. First of all, yes, I did have some, not many, of testimonies that give us an understanding of how some of it happened. For instance, maps and notes that were found on the terrorist bodies in the kibbutzim with specific structure of the building, with specific information. If there is any kind of weapon in a specific house, if where the safe room is in that specific house, who to kill first, who the family in this house is. Very specific information.
But that's after.
that was found after they infiltrated, but it just tells us that some of the information must have come from people who were inside those places,
For sure.
because otherwise you can't access that information. So that does exist in the book, and in general we probably know that, but I wish, as for your main question, I wish first I had more answers, I knew more, because these are questions we all keep asking ourselves, how did it happen to us? But from the very beginning, from the very first moment, the thing that has driven me and that I've stick to is basically focusing on the what and not the why. What happened on October 7th and why it happened. The question of how it happened is probably more interesting. Is probably how is it even possible that they invaded like that? How is it even possible that it took us so long to get there? We are such a small country. And those are very important questions that need to be investigated carefully, and that I want the answers just as you do. But I did from the very beginning, and knowingly and from a very clear choice, focusing on the what happened and why it happened, and leaving the why to someone else.
And the how.
And the how it happened,
So
the
that
why
will be
and
your
the
next
how.
book?
And maybe it will.
Yeah.
Every time people tell me, I wish your next book will be testimonies from the hostages that come back.
That was my question. Is that the next book?
Let's see that they come back.
God willing, they come back.
Yeah.
I'll just ask one more. If you were starting it today, what would you do different than what you did? How you did it, how the book turned out? Do you think about that, or are you so busy that you haven't
He wishes
looked?
he wouldn't have had to write it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
First of all, yeah.
course.
Every time, that's so unfortunate, because every time I go and meet people, they tell me, we shake hands, we meet for the first time, and they tell me, I wish we never met. Because they meet me because of the book, and they just say, I wish we never met.
Right.
And I really also wish we never met. And I can say very honestly that not only the cover of the book, but also the testimonies, the organization of the book, the way it is put, the people I wanted to interview, I had that vision, clear vision from the very beginning. I knew exactly who I wanted to interview. I knew exactly what I wanted to get out of it. I knew exactly that my book would focus more on the atrocities and the graphic details, rather than just also much of the emotional process and the experiences that I went through, but also of the graphic details. I knew that I would focus on it. I knew exactly how I wanted to do it. I knew the order. I knew who I'm going to reach out to. It's kind of amazing that from the first day that I imagined the book, this is how I imagine it. I always say it. There are always, it never goes like that. And it also didn't, because you want to speak with someone. And then it's only a month after October 7th. You want to speak with the head of some very important medical institution in Israel who took care of the bodies. They're looking at you, you go to the spokesperson of the office, and they're looking, who are you? Like, we have requests, hundreds of requests from the biggest news outlets all around the world to be interviewed, and we don't have time because he has to get, who are you? Just saying that you're gonna write a book that will stay here for centuries, that will be the most important document in the history of the, like, okay, you say so what? so you say. So sometimes I keep insisting and convince them. Sometimes I don't, and I go just like that, go to speak to that person, specific person directly.